for 13 years, I worked at ESPN as a feature producer, which is most simply explained as a storyteller for television. I traveled the world chronicling human interest stories against the backdrop of sports. I covered 6 World Series. I interviewed Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, LeBron James. Somehow I missed Pat LaFontaine. I also interviewed terminally ill little leaguers and disabled amateurs. Really, the athlete was secondary to how they were capable of inspiring. And it was such a privilege for me to be invited into their private pains and their sacred celebrations, and to in turn take you, the viewer, with me. If you've ever watched SportsCenter or E60 and you cried, I was likely one of your culprits. I reported more than 300 stories in my career. I saw and achieved some incredible things. But there was one story that gripped me like no other. It was what I found on some beat-up old wrestling mats in Cleveland, Ohio in 2009 that caused my spirit to just sink and soar all in the same moment. It was a story so compelling that after I reported it, I became a part of it, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. It all began on a cold February morning in 2009, nearly 10 years ago, when my father called me from Cleveland, which is where I'm from, and he still lives. He was an avid sports fan, always on the lookout for my next great sports story. And up until that point, he had never found it. But on that morning, he brought my attention to this image that you're looking at in his local newspaper. With it was a short article explaining that these 2 young men were high school wrestling teammates and best friends in inner city Cleveland, Ohio. Leroy Sutton, the boy on the left, is it your left? No, your right, had lost both of his legs when he was struck by a freight train while walking to school at the age of 11. His ride, Dartanyon Crockett, was born with optic neuropathy and is legally blind. He cannot make out the facial features of one sitting 4 or 5 feet away from him. Because their gym and the team buses and most of the gyms that they competed in were not wheelchair accessible, Dartanyon carried Leroy on and off every bus, to and from every mat that season. Together, they attended high school in a drug and gang-ridden neighborhood with a graduation rate of less than 40%. And that afternoon, the paper said, was to be their sectional meet, perhaps the last matches of their high school career. To me, that photo, I just couldn't look away. It was the one who could not walk being carried by the one who could not see. I had seen a lot of things in my career, but I had never seen a photo like that before, and I just wondered how life brought these 2 together, how much they were carrying, where they were going, and what we could learn from them. I was compelled to find them, and I convinced my manager to let me hop a flight that very morning, something that also had never happened in 10 years. I arrived in Cleveland just 5 hours later. I entered the gym as they were warming up, and there they were, walking right toward me, Leroy on Dartanyon's back. Before I could get too close, their coach noticed my camera crew and intercepted me. I extended my hand to introduce myself, and he playfully slapped it away. And this 300-pound, larger-than-life, old-school coach just leaned in close to me, and he said, "Listen here, I don't need to know your name. All we need to get straight is that you have been sent by God." So no pressure there, right? He went on to explain that every day he walked the track, circled the track of his little humble gym, praying for his athletes. And he said, "This year, I've been praying hard for Sutton and Crockett because they're seniors. And once they graduate, the world's got nothing for kids like these." Well, despite their coach's excitement, Leroy and Dartanyon were both reticent to speak to me at first. Dartanyon answered my question with short, cryptic answers. Leroy didn't answer at all. Every time I got near, he put his headphones in and his head down. He wanted nothing to do with me. Their coach told me to be patient. He said, "They probably just think you're a turkey lady." I said, "A what lady?" He said, "You know, a turkey lady." One of those suburban white people who come over to our side of town on Thanksgiving to drop off the turkeys and the canned goods. And then they go back to their cozy life thinking they did their good deed for the year. They probably just think you're a turkey lady. Well, I didn't know if I was a turkey lady or not, but I knew I didn't want them thinking I was one, and so I set out to begin earning their trust. And as I did, I learned more. I learned how Dartanyon's mother died when he was just 8 years old of a brain aneurysm. He was separated from his 6 siblings and sent to live with his father, who was an alcohol and crack addict. By the time Dartanyon was a sophomore in high school, he was transient, jumping from friend to friend and couch to couch. Despite daily hunger and homelessness and his low vision, Dartanyon had muscles bunched like walnuts. He was the top wrestler in his conference and a state powerlifting champion with a deadlift of 585 pounds. To Pat's point, Dartanyon says he wouldn't have graduated if it weren't for sports, which anchored him with a sense of belonging that he didn't know at home. Leroy's mother also frequently chose drugs over rent, and Leroy passed through 10 schools in 12 years. His mother dealt the supporter habit, and Leroy said that each day, up to 75 customers would pass through his front door as he hid in his room and often under his bed. He told me early on, I was never nurtured, only dealt with. After his accident, his mother was ill-equipped for the depth of his care and disappeared for weeks and even months at a time, leaving him alone to care for his younger sister. Leroy would put on a smile and still go to school every day, not wanting to be a bother to anyone else. People marveled and called him an inspiration, but on the best of days, he just felt like a conversation piece. Most of the time, he felt invisible, because fractures of the heart and mind can hurt worse than 1,000 broken bones. Both Leroy and Dartanyon released the details of their home lives cautiously, testing what I could handle and if I would leave. They had never had a safe space in which to share their stories or a safe person to whom to share their stories. And as the weeks turned into months of filming, both boys began that perhaps I genuinely cared. And I did care. I was amazed by their resiliency and by how their primary coping mechanism for their dire circumstances and their disabilities was not drugs, it was not gangs, it was not a sense of entitlement or bitterness. Their primary coping mechanism for all that was stacked against them was a friendship. The carrying was really just a symbol for the care that they shared. Now, the beauty of this was clear to me. How to share what I was seeing with my viewers was more complicated, because up until that point, all of my stories had been on individual athletes, or a specific sports moment, or one game. I had never done a story on a friendship, which is fluid, it's organic in nature. And what I quickly learned is that I couldn't go about sort of chronologically, systematically collecting the elements for the story as I would normally do. I couldn't call out, okay, let's be funnier on this take, or let's see your warmth and your care on this take. It just kills the chemistry, and I killed a lot of chemistry in the beginning as I was trying to figure out how to get a friendship to play naturally on camera. And what I learned was that in order to do that, I had to become a part of it. I had to be in on the conversation and a part of the jokes. And initially, this was very difficult for me because even though I too was raised in Cleveland, I was raised on the other side, the white side, by parents who they themselves were the products of segregation. They had been taught by their government, by their families, by their schools that separate equaled safer. And even though my father was the one who brought this story to my attention, he was not happy that I was spending time in the city's rougher neighborhoods. I, on the other hand, was really eager to show him that I had evolved from his mindsets. And yet the truth is that when I spent time with Leroy and Dartanyon in their communities with their families, the truth is that I struggled. It was like there was an elephant in every room, and that elephant was me. It turned out I was uncomfortable being the minority. I was uncomfortable sitting in abject poverty. I was uncomfortable with the chaos of it all. Furthermore, I had been taught to believe that with determination and perseverance, anything was possible. And yet here, sitting in these communities, even for the hardworking people, it felt like nothing was possible. It felt kind of hopeless. But I kept going back. I learned to sit, to listen. I wanted to learn more. And as I did, I grew to understand the generational cycles of poverty that ensnared good kids like Leroy and Dartanyon. I grew to understand that being poor and being homeless had less to do with running out of money and everything to do with running out of useful relationships. I wanted to be part of the solution. I wanted to be the answer to their coaches' prayers. I wanted to be more than the turkey lady, but I wasn't sure how. My 12-minute feature entitled Carry On aired on ESPN in 2009. Like their coach, I had prayed for just one person with a big heart and a big pocketbook to be moved enough to want to help these two, but that turned out to be small thinking, because instead I got a legion. Men and women saw potential in these two underdogs. Tens of thousands of dollars poured into my email account, and college became an instant reality for them. And I really thought that I was just going to pack them off and wave proudly from afar as they rode off into their new lives, as though we had simply kicked this poverty problem to the curb. But it turned out that the landmines between their dreams and their realities were more than they could handle on their own. We quickly encountered obstacles such as when Leroy needed a bank check for his college housing deposit and he didn't know a soul with a bank account. Or Dartanyon, despite passing his standardized tests and graduating with a 3.0, emerged with a 5th grade math level and an 8th grade reading level, because as I learned, not all educations are created equal. Neither one of them could hang on to 2 nickels, hit a deadline, return a call, or organize a day. It was like they had all of the heart and soul of the survivors that they were, but none of the life skills they needed to become self-sufficient. And when they would fail, which was almost daily, many of them would look at my struggles and say, "How ungrateful are these two to waste these opportunities? How lazy are they? How stupid are they?" And this hurt deeply, because I knew in my heart they weren't lazy or stupid or ungrateful. I suspected they were simply who you become when you grow up without a stable support system. But still, I laid awake many of nights wondering if we had bitten off more than we could chew, if the baggage they carried with them out of poverty was too heavy, if their start too slow. But fortunately, what I grew to understand just in time was that handing them opportunities was only half of the solution, only half of what they needed. The other half, and the really critical half, was love. And not just the warm, fuzzy love, but the kind of love that is coupled with commitment and action. They needed that long-range sort of love that they could trust to be with them through the 2 steps forward and every step back. And so when things grew harder, I resolved to love harder in practical ways. I worked with the boys daily, teaching them how to navigate adult responsibilities. I left my job at ESPN and invested in these two, and together we tackled everything from coursework and tutoring, banking, budgeting, disability services, much-needed medical care, symptoms of PTSD, counseling, you name it, we tackled it. And still, those early years were marked by constant failure, because even minor challenges can feel like major threats to those who come out of the toxic stress of poverty. It was like everything in their life had taught them how to endure a problem, but nothing taught them how to solve a problem. And we had to reverse those mindsets. It was not the quick fix that my type A personality usually likes. At one point, I even asked a psychologist who had treated Leroy after his accident if it was even how long it would take, or if it was even possible for him to overcome the traumas of his accident and his youth and go on to lead a self-sufficient life. The psychologist looked at me earnestly, and he said, if it took 18 years to create this mess, it might take another 18 to unravel it. But the only way you're going to fail as if you stop trying. So we kept at it, and I prayed at every turn. We continued to build trust. Our conversations naturally turned to vital topics like relationships and the atrocities of their childhood, their youth, and how those affected their coping mechanisms. Slowly, we began to take steps forward, and with every victory, I would just lavish them with praise. Because what I was seeing was that being born a Sutton, being born a Crockett, being born into zip codes like these can look like a life sentence to an outsider. But it didn't have to be. A committed sort of love coupled with action could change the trajectory of those lives and break that cycle. And break it did they ever. Through our relationships, Dartanyon and Leroy began to develop their sense of self-worth and discover their true potentials. Today, Leroy is the first person in his family with a high school diploma and now a college degree. He is employed in the video game industry, which was his dream. And if he were here today, he would tell you that despite wrestling with the big why questions of his accident for more than a decade, he has now decided that he would much rather change this world than walk on it. Through my sporting connections and Dartanyon's natural athletic giftedness, he was given the chance to move to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs in 2010 as a resident athlete, and he trained full-time in the Paralympic sport of blind judo. Dartanyon won bronze medals in both the 2012 and the 2016 Rio Games. And in between there, he was the 2014 world champion. And as he took each of those podiums, I just sobbed, and I thanked God that this boy who had spent his life feeling trampled by the world finally got to stand on top of it. Today, Dartanyon is studying to be a social worker because he wants to help kids who come from backgrounds like his. He says he's learned that the difference between making it and not making it in this world is having just one person who believes in you. And he is now becoming that person for countless others. As for me, I learned that if you treat a man as he is, you leave him worse than he is. But if you treat a man as to the potential he has to become, you make him better than he is. I think you'll all agree that at least on paper or in photograph, there's little about the three of us that go together. I'm white, they're African American. I'm Ivy League, they're urban educated. I'm upper class, they were born into poverty. I'm physically whole, they have challenges. Never mind the 15-year age and culture gap. We had every excuse for why we couldn't connect with one another. No one would have blamed us had we walked away. But instead, we stepped out of our safe, small spaces, across the barriers of our perceived differences, and we found compassion for one another emerge in this unexpected place, at this unexpected time, connecting unlikely people. We found the power of our whole was greater than the sum of our very different parts. And moreover, we became a family. I think early in my career, I associated blessing with a promising opportunity or good health or a nice family, that these were somehow heaven's rewards for living well. But what I've learned through this story is that being blessed has much less to do with what we have, what we achieve, and everything to do with what we are able to give. That we are blessed if we can take hope to hard places. That we are blessed if we can use our talents, our time, and our treasures to participate in the redemptive journey of another. That we are blessed if we can come alongside someone and pick up their broken pieces and make something beautiful out of them. My pastor calls this finding your go, and I've kind of stolen that phrase as I've been on the speaking circuit. What it means is to find your go is to identify your unique contribution for the good of the world, for the good of the community, for the good of your workplace in your current season of life. And so I ask you, what patient, what family member, what fellow, what community member, what person at this conference even needs what you are especially gifted and specifically equipped to offer. Who needs you in their corner to fill that corner with more light, more truth, more purpose, more wonder? We're all on this journey together to live life in its fullest, right? But the key to doing that is remembering that we're not just living it for ourselves, but we're living it for the good, the benefit of all those around us, both near and far. Jeff has found his go serving the athletes and growing medical care in Kenya. Pat has found his current go growing and improving the sports engagement among youth. Chad has found his go right here, serving all of you at AMSSM and advocating for policy. I threw everything I had into reversing the course of these two young athletes. And so as you go forth and you consider, I hope that you remember part of Leroy and Dartanyon's story. I hope you too resolve to be extraordinary and powerful in the lives of those around you. May you, like their coach, pray big prayers for earnest prayers for big things. May you speak words that make souls stronger. And may you remember what it looks like when you take the hand of one who feels forgotten in this world and you say, "Not on my watch." You are not alone in this place. You are not alone in this world, because I will walk beside you. Because I think we can all agree that we're probably not going to get to the end of this life and be asked about our credentials or our net worth. I think if we're asked anything at all, it's going to be how we invested in the people who are in our spheres of influence. I think we're going to find that we only got this one life, and we didn't truly live it unless we gave it away. Thank you.